Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Very good evening to all our viewers who are watching. So today, our webinar for the next 1 hour, we are going to be talking about teacher professional development, what, how, and when. So basically, you know what this is going to tell you and what this is going to talk about with our amazing guests that we have today. The focus is going to be on professional development of teachers. We have been talking about this endlessly and forever in our programs. And so today, the next 1 hour is going to be attributed to teachers and their professional development with our guests, who I will be introducing in just a while. First, I would like to introduce our department and the endeavors at the education department. So I would like to tell our audience today that the Department of Education has launched a new program which we have been talking about for a very long time now, and we have been explaining to our audience who are teachers and who want to join the teaching profession that the Department of Education has been driven to educate teachers in different various disciplines. We have been offering B.Ed, we have been offering the MA in Education program, we have been offering MS in ELM, as well as PhD in Education Leadership and Management. However, in the last year, HEC decided to get away and do away with the Masters in Education program. That was offered for teachers who had 14 years of education and qualification. And so, with that program eliminating, we have now introduced the B.Ed degree, which is a 2.5-year program, which is a bridging degree. ये मैं हमेशा सबको समझाती हूँ, and people say कि जी B.Ed की क्या value है? B.Ed की बहुत ज़्यादा value है. B.Ed की value ये है कि अगर आपने B.Ed कर लिया, 2.5-year B.Ed अगर आपने कर लिया 14-year education के बाद, तो you are eligible to directly get your admission in our MPhil or MSCLM program. And MS and MPhil are equal degrees. Okay? So this is going to be your bridging degree instead of your master's program. Now this will be your bridging degree to enter the career ladder. Okay? So I would really encourage everyone to get more information about this through our programs. This is the scheme of study right in front of you. So this is the B.Ed 1.5. The B.Ed 2.5 has a bit of, yes. So this is the B.Ed 2.5, which I'd like to talk about. It has a total 90 credit. It is a total 90 credit hour course. ठीक है, 2.5 साल में ही आपका होगा. 90 credit hours हैं. इसमें 23 आपको 4 courses करने होंगे in 2.5 years. You will have 4 content specialization courses as well, जिसके अंदर एक strand जो होती है वो हमारी teacher education की है. One strand is early childhood education. The third strand is leadership and management. Okay? Then, of course, you are going to be uh, uh, involved in research projects, and you will be conducting research as part of the course. And you will be, an interesting part of this course is that you will be going into field experiences. So if you're not teaching, we will be responsible to send you in a school and make sure that you get the relevant teaching experience that we need. और इस डिग्री की international recognition भी है. So if you do your B.Ed with us, which is a 2.5-year degree, you are eligible to go and work in any international school as well as a teacher. Okay? So this is about our program, and we have our admissions open nowadays. And इसके अंदर ये सारी बातें हमारे सारे programs के अंदर, we have professional development courses, we have teacher education courses, we have educational leadership courses. So this webinar today is a strand of what we have always been talking about. We have always been talking about teacher education. We have been talking about continuous professional development for teachers. And so this webinar is an initiative to talk more about how, when, and what about teaching and professional development. अच्छा जी, थोड़ा सा मैं आप लोगों को समझा दूं before we begin the objectives of the webinar. So we are going to be talking mostly, we're going to be focusing on 3 things. So we will help you develop a clear understanding about high performing professional development experiences. देखिए, professional development हर जगह हो रही है. जैसे हमारी discussion एक मेरी अफजल के साथ हो रही थी before while we were planning, is that professional development हो रही है, हर school करा रहा है, बहुत सारे आप external भी लोगों को बुलाते हैं, in service programs भी हो रहे हैं CPD के, but are they always effective? So आज का जो keyword है वो है high performing professional development experiences. So we will be looking at along with our experts कि जी high performing professional development experiences होते क्या है, ठीक है? The second thing we will be talking about is that we will be analyzing the critical attributes of national and global competencies of effective teachers. So not only nationally, there are professional standards of teachers. So national standards bhi hai, I'm sure. वैसे तो मुझे when I teach, I know that a lot of people don't even know कि हमारे कोई professional standards भी हैं. However, we have great professional standards which have been developed nationally. So we will have one of our guest speakers speaking about global international standards as well. Okay. So that is one of our objective for today as well. And the last one is that we will be talking about strategies to monitor the effectiveness of professional development activities for teachers. ठीक है? So आपको strategies बताई जाएंगी, tools दिए जाएंगे, बात की जाएगी कि effective और ineffective professional development क्या होती है. ठीक है? So that is a little bit of an overview. And towards the end, we will be taking question and answer sessions. But now I'm going to introduce our esteemed guests. So Sarah Turner is here with me. Hello, Sarah. Welcome to our webinar today. Thank you so much for taking out time for SZABIST, for the Department of Education, and being with us here. So, Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, certainly. My name is Sarah Turner. I come from a teaching background myself. I was an English teacher in UK secondary schools for 15 years until I joined Cambridge about 4.5 years ago. I'm now the head of professional development programmes with Cambridge International, and I look after mainly our professional development qualifications, our PDQs that are delivered around the world. And I'm also in charge of our global teacher and school leader standards as well. So I'm looking forward to talking to you all about those later on.
Great, amazing. Thank you, Sarah. And our second guest is Simon. Simon Glasson has been working in Pakistan. I'm so proud to say that you have been working here for, I think, from about 2014 and 15. At present, you are working as head of Karachi Grammar School. And you have also worked at the city school where I started my career from. And, you spent a long time there. So I would like you to introduce yourself, Simon. Thank you so much for coming in. So let's have a word from you.
I think you've done a good job of introducing me already, really. I'm not sure what's left. Well, I mean, I was in London for 25 years, actually, teaching. Did my training in Durham University, went down to London and never left until 2015, where I came to Pakistan, started in Lahore, via Dubai and then back to Karachi since 2016. And I was at PAF chapter, the city school was principal there for 3 years, and now principal at Karachi Grammar School.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Simon, for giving us your time. And I'm sure we are going to have a great discussion with you. Our third guest and our very, very special guest, Mohammad Afzal. Mohammad Afzal has been instrumental in our program. I'm very proud to say that Mohammad Afzal is a scholar at our ELM program, which is the MPhil program. And Afzal has been working, for a very, very long time in the field as well. So Afzal, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Sadiya, and I would like to first of all, express my gratitude to both the speakers who are here today with us, and of course the SZABIST team. To start with my introduction, my name is Mohammad Afzal, and I'm currently working with the City School Private Limited as Zonal Manager in Karachi. It's my 14th year in teacher education programs. But I really believe the real turning point in my career was when I joined Cambridge Professional Development Qualifications. And that actually helped me in knowing about the insight of what the real and high impact professional development program is. And then we could see the impact of this program. So we are planning today to share our experiences and to share with the rest of the audience sitting with us in this webinar, like how they can transform their professional development from a conventional to a high impact program. So let's see.
Great. Okay. So I am going to be now opening the discussion, and I hope we have people joining us here. If you have any questions, please keep them going, and we will try and take as many questions and have the experts answer your queries as well. So Simon, should we begin with you? I'm going to ask you the first question. So, in teacher development and teacher training, it is said that, it's this notion that, for every problem, there is one-stop solution, which is teacher training, teacher development. How true is it? What is your opinion about it?
Well, I mean, it goes all the way back to originally how things happen in training. I mean, I started off the traditional teacher training route after doing a degree. And Sarah was smiling. I'm sure she did exactly the same thing. And it was a case of, you had 1 year of becoming a teacher. And you'd be stuck in a lecture hall, a lecture theatre, absorbing everything, a bit like osmosis. And then, of course, after that, you were launched into, in my case, a secondary school in the outskirts of Durham, in the mining community there. And the realities of teaching got to me very quickly. And it was sort of, that idea that you're in a classroom which is meant to teach you absolutely everything, and you get into, an actual classroom in a school, what a difference. And you think, did that term that preceded it, did it really prepare me for what I'm now facing? Yes. I've got a student in front of me who apparently at the weekend burnt down a tyre service in the local estate, and now I've got to teach him RE in year 8. You think the realities suddenly get to you about teaching, and you think, well, in that case, does the sort of theory fit the practice? And I think over years, well, I've been now in education as a professional for 30 years, and in that time, I look at it and think there's been so many different models. There's been, in training, as in school training as well, graduate teacher programs and so on. And there's been all sorts of different models. And actually, I'm not sure which one works, but when you talk about a one-size-fits-all, it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. We're all different. We're individual. The presentations we're about to do are all going to be very different. And you look forward, you think, well, okay, what should happen? Well, what really should happen is, yes, you enter in a certain way, and then, of course, you've got different pathways which are individual. Do we believe one size fits all for students? No, of course we don't. We talk about personalized learning. We talk about different pathways for them. So it should be the same for us. And that should be fed through targets that you have individually for teachers, and then part of their appraisal system, which some people love and some people detest. It depends who you are and what benefits you see of it. Through that, you can have targets which then include a professional development target of where, how is that going to fit you? Not, oh, do you know what? I fancy going to Greece this year to do something on IT in education, when actually you have nothing to do with IT in education.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, absolutely. It shouldn't be cherry picking courses. It should be about a whole career development, which is personalized for you.
So a personalized career development program, rather than just a general program that fits, that we want everyone to benefit from. Yes, and from your conversation, it takes me back to when I conduct trainings and when we ask teachers, because sometimes what happens, usually the teacher training that takes place here, so if we offer a workshop, and then teachers from different schools come and attend that workshop, and so it is one of my thing is always when I start a workshop, I ask people, have you been sent, or is this something that you opted for and you really want to do this? Is it going to benefit you? And do you think, so most of the time, sadly, people say that no, we have been sent here because it is a requirement of the school that we must do professional development workshops. So I think I can relate to that. So today we are going to be talking about how leaders and educational heads and principals and coordinators can organize better suited diagnostic trainings for their staff members, which will actually not only just fill in papers and records, but also give something that people actually need. So Sarah, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, everything that Simon said really resonated there. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think probably we came very sort of similar paths. But I think what's really important is understanding then about how our perception of training for teachers and professional development for teachers has changed, and understanding that what we know potentially real benefit is something that's sustained and something that's embedded, something that exists within the school itself. So you were talking then, Sadiya, and it was really interesting about, you know, being sent to training. And I again, that really resonates. And it was often subject specific training. It wasn't to do with my own pedagogical content knowledge or my view of myself as an effective classroom practitioner. And I think that's what we're trying now to move forward with, is that sort of empowerment of teachers as practitioner and their understanding of their practice. The subject specific stuff, of course, is really important, but actually how effective are they as a practitioner in their classroom? How can they measure that? How can they evaluate that as a practitioner, and how within their culture as somebody who delivers teaching and learning, how can they be encouraged then to progress? So that's kind of what I picked up from that.
That's true. Great. Okay, Sarah, so I have a question for you. So, you know, when you are going into, you've had this huge experience in your training career as well. And, you know, when you go and deliver a training, you know, there's this specific time that you know when the penny is dropped, you know, and that you realize that, you know, this is it, bang, I've done a great job. And now my participants know what I'm talking about. They're on the same level, on the same page as I am, and where I want them to be. So can you share something on that? How do you know?
Yeah, and what I'll do, if it's okay, is I'll share sort of anecdotal evidence from things that kind of are fed back to us from PDQ programs the world over. And often these PDQ programs start out small. They're something that starts out with just a few people getting involved, those that really believe in that sustained and embedded approach. And I think what's been most rewarding for me is learning how those programs just grow. So I've got one particular example of a school in Zambia who started with just 3 teachers, because everybody looked at it a bit suspiciously. What's this thing that you want us to get involved with over 4 months, you know? And I need a mentor, you know, there's suspicion. The second time they ran that program, 35 people signed up to be part of that. And I think that's when the penny drops about the quality of sustained and embedded professional development. And I think as well, something else that came back to me over the pandemic was a teacher that had said that she had been through the teaching and learning PDQ. So this is all about, you know, the very foundation of what it means to be a really good classroom practitioner. The pandemic hit, and suddenly she needed to do exactly the same as she was doing the week before, but online. And she said the power of that kind of professional development was her ability to pivot really quickly and to be able to use different strategies to be able to continue with quality learning and teaching. But I think at the heart of that, be able to reflect on what was useful and what wasn't useful. You know, every one of us that stepped foot in a classroom knows that not every teaching experience is as good as we imagined it would be when we planned it. But the fact is, being a reflective practitioner allows you then to think about that and to improve upon that and to make sure you're giving the best quality experience for your students.
Of course. And, you know, I think Simon also mentioned this, and you're also reiterating the same fact that from theory to practice, things are like totally different. Yeah. And so what we are practicing, and sometimes, you know, when we are teaching teachers and we feel that they've actually learned it, but when you actually get that into practice and you observe them, and I think one important part of continuous professional development is the follow-up. You know, when you can actually go in with the teachers to observe what they have learned and how they are implementing it, because that is where your actual success lies, like both of you are saying. So, Afzal, thank you, Sarah. Afzal, coming to you now. Afzal, मुझे आप बताएं कि in your experience, you have been working extensively with big school systems here. So, आप मुझे बताएं, for you, how has it been? I mean, you know, the whole teaching and professional development experiences that you've had with teachers. Let's start with that.
Well, the experiences were really different and diverse in nature. So many a times we face a similar idea, the similar feedback, the similar reaction as Simon and Sarah told, like the participant felt like they are sent for a training which was never meant for them. So many a times they also translated that professional development experience as not very much relevant to them and not very much relevant to their needs. And as Simon very rightly mentioned, that we talk a lot about the different learners' abilities that different learners need. We talk a lot about differentiated learners, but we don't
Yeah.
consider a lot about differentiated teachers training program as well. So teachers, they might come up with different sets of abilities, different contexts and different backgrounds. And one size cannot be fit for all the teachers at the same time. So that sort of professional development where need is not actually realized, where relevance is not maintained, and where reaction time is not given in terms of developing the practice within the classroom, you can very easily say that such professional development is either is going to end up without an impact or no impact at all. So these kind of experiences were there. So what generally we found out, a professional development which is relevant, which is contextualized, and which is job embedded, and which is sustained by the school in itself, which is supported by the school leader and by the colleagues, it tends to give you better and higher impact than the conventional models in itself. So this is what I experienced in my career throughout.
Hmm, 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 hmm. Okay, so we have, I think, covered how the need of alignment of professional development activities are there along with the teacher training that we are doing. So if we can
Uh,
now move to G.
may I just add to what the word you just mentioned about alignment of the program. I would like
Yeah.
to share with you one very interesting bit which we did while doing our MS program under the supervision of Dr. Najmunisa. It was kind of mapping of the content with the expectations from the teacher. And if I could show you what I'm trying to say, because that's going to help uh, most of the participants who are sitting here. Can we all look at this small spider graph diagram? Uh, if you look at the right hand side, this is going to give you a spider web sort of visual with the triangle which is uh, tilted to something, and on left hand side there are certain themes and certain ideas of professional development. Now, when we talk about alignment, have a look at this one experience of professional development, and we have collected this data through a case study in a school, which is very much evident. Like out of 60 hours of practice, 45 hours of professional development were given to the conventional teaching and learning strategies and program. And only 2 hours of that professional development were aligned towards students' development or school development. And probably 0 hours or nothing was allocated to personal relationship and service, and just 11 hours of professional development for the core values of teacher. Now, this sort of imbalance or not balancing situation might not be a good example of alignment of professional development into practice. So when we expect a lot from professional development, we should also look into this idea of aligning the professional development experience with the expectations from the teachers. And I generally say that we can achieve this if we are able to follow these 6 principles of professional development design. What Sarah and what Simon mentioned, if it is relevant, you should look into your professional development program design, whether it is relevant to the needs. Number two, if this is capable of helping teachers in planning and improving their instructions. And then if it is teacher driven, now when I say teacher driven, this means a lot of involvement by the teacher, in not only in the learning part, but also practicing part. And then including hands-on strategies. And the professional development design should be interactive. And most importantly, it should not end by the end of the day. Rather, it should continue in smaller succession like a good example of PDQs where you practice for 4 months or at least in terms of your evidence of practice, and then you collect your evidence of reflection, and that become part of your habit. So a good or high impact professional development program is actually aligned in its design to the needs of the teachers and relevance to the organization.
Okay, okay, great. Right. So, Afzal, you showed us a diagram which seemed pretty interesting. So, if we can just go back to that slide for a minute, in which we were talking about competencies. Yes, so 5 domains of teacher competencies. So, what we are trying to tell our audience, Afzal, if I'm not wrong, is that these are the 5 competencies that training should be conducted in, right? So, if some of our leaders
Well,
are listening, let's give a quick summary of this, Afzal.
yes, if I may, these are core competencies, and these are core 5 themes. There might be 10, there might be 7, there might be 12, but these are core 5 set of competencies which are part of most of the competencies framework around the world, including
Yeah.
Pakistan. And when you
Yes.
compare your own professional development programs, you would see like some part of your workshop or some part of your session is falling into any one of these competencies. So you cannot separate, rather you can categorize them into different themes. So
Yeah.
for this research purpose, I was able to categorize 5 different domains. And then as we'll move further, we are going to talk more into the details of competencies and professional standards, what are expected in Pakistan
Yes.
from the teachers
Yes.
practicing here, and then what are global sets. But this is a precise summarized version of those competencies. And what I was trying to narrate here, that if you look
Hmm.
at the design of your professional development program, you're going to see a situation where quite a lot is given to 1 or 2 domains, but rest of the domains which are equally important, which are equally helpful for the teachers to work in the classroom situation, those are neglected, and those are not
Yeah.
aligned with those professional development design, which is why
Indeed.
we do not get the desired results.
Okay, great. And we will be, as you said, talking about the professional standards of teachers in Pakistan as well as globally. So I think that is something to look forward to. And if there are teachers who are tuned in and don't know about these professional standards, this is a good time to learn about them. And again, I would reiterate that if you are a teacher, then these things are very, very important. You know, we sometimes feel usually हमें ये लगता है कि government ने कोई काम नहीं किया और हमारे जो है वो documents are not in place. That is not true. You know, we have excellent documents which have been reviewed internationally by huge agencies and donor agencies, and one of them is the professional standards for teachers. तो वो एक बड़ा जबरदस्त document है जो हम अभी discussion में लाएंगे. So if you're tuned in, you must make your notes, make sure that you download that from Google. It is available there, and so we will be talking more about that. Thank you, Afzal. My next question, Simon, is to you, that as an instructional leader, coach, and a facilitator, could you please share your thoughts and experiences about developing and leading high performing professional development experiences with us, please? Simon, we can't hear you. You are muted. So if you could unmute yourself.
Yes, that's a schoolboy error, as they would say. I believe if it's good enough for Jeff Bezos, it's good enough for me. As far as moving on to this, hopefully you'll be able to see my screen. Can you see my screen? I'm hoping you can.
Yes, we can.
Right. You should be able to see
Loud and clear.
vote for high performance. You see, going to that IT course in Greece helped me. I've managed to get this working. So we're looking at really sort of, I turned it on its head a bit because I was told high performance professional development. Well, I thought, well, wait a minute, professional development is actually for high performance. And how do we do that? Well, first of all, there's strategy. You know, often I talked at the beginning of randomly going off to courses. A school needs to have strategies. It needs to have a very clear strategy for CPD. Currently, I'm looking at that in my own school. across the 4 sections. We'll be looking at how we're going to do that going into the next year. But particularly, what are you trying to do? Are you developing leaders? Are you looking at, school improvement? Are you looking at classroom sort of improvement? Are you looking at the ethos of the school? What things are you wanting to develop? And so on. And they always say a good school is one that eventually you're equipped to be able to be promoted from. And I think it's true. I mean, often in schools in the UK, we've lost some fantastic teachers and leaders, but they've gone on to be just as fantastic, not better, elsewhere. And you've got to, I think part of the strategy, you mustn't be afraid to lose people. You're developing professional individuals, and I think that's crucial. And the other thing is creating leaders of learning. So who are the leaders of learning in your school? Who are those people who are sort of crucial to it? Well, you see, there's that top-down model of, it can just be the senior leadership team and cascade down. Well,
cascade model,
the cascade is sort of, really? Or do you have people, within the building who are professionals who can help, like, for example, subject specialists, someone who's a specialist looking at learning and teaching, someone else looking at student progress, someone else looking at enrichment, and the same carry on. And, it's what are you trying to do? And I think you need to have specific leaders within your school who you can rely on. We've got some really good individuals at our school at the moment. There's a few, particularly in one section I can think of, who've really developed ICT and the digital learning. And by the way, they came out of a PDQ as well. So that's something for Sarah to be proud of there. It does work extremely well. Next, career pathways. It isn't just about, as I said earlier, about what happens in the school. It's about developing that career pathways for individuals. Where do they want to go? I remember a very early on conversation when I started teaching was, where do you want to go? Do you want to go down the academic route or the pastoral route? And I used to think, do I have to select one? And it was interesting because actually I don't think it's as clear cut as that. You've got to look really at the beginning. I think you need to be able to have a very broad menu, and then you can start specializing. It's a bit like the O to A level model, and you eventually probably know where you want to go, but then your CPD needs to be tied into that career pathway. In the UK, we have something called the NPQH, which is the National Professional Qualification for Headship, which is something that some people take in about their first few years of teaching. And you think, is that what they should be doing? Is that what they're aiming for? I've come across people with NPQHs who are just classroom teachers. And then you've got somebody who's about to be a head who hasn't got a National Professional Qualification for Headship. So you need to be sensible about where you're going. I've deliberately put this in grey. It's what everyone thinks of. Oh, data. I always remember someone saying to me once, Simon, we're in a data-driven school. And it used to make me smile. Data. How do you use data? Well, there's data for example, observation of your classrooms. There's data for student progress and student attainment. There's all sorts of data that you can have coming out of your MIS, but how do you use it? And that data can be used also to inform what you're going to do with your training within the school. And I think data is crucial if it's used properly. Data, for example, in the UK, we used to look at different groups of learners. And it was fascinating to see the progress within, for example, free school meals, which is a sort of a subgroup in the UK that we look at. And generally, we look at the attainment there, or we look at boys and girls, gender differences, and so on. But all of that also, you can look at teachers with data and you can evaluate their outcomes. It can be used very crudely in a way which doesn't help, but data can also help with CPD. Then there's the evaluation. I'm not just talking about appraisal, although appraisal is important. You need to evaluate in your school whether the CPD program is actually working. Is it relevant? You know, if you've got a school development plan of 3 years, and at the end of that first year, those targets aren't being reached, you need to re-evaluate your CPD program. Think, how can we reach the targets for the second year? And again, with a school improvement plan or development plan, it's important just to have maybe 3, 4 max main whole school targets. And you evaluate each year whether the training is helping for that, and also evaluate whether the training is having impact on student progress, student attainment, and whether it is helping you in your individual career pathway. Time. Creating time for professional learning. I love that diagram earlier, Afzal. It's quite fascinating. You know, they sometimes say a school where you have, I mean, this may come as a shock because I have worked in schools where contact time roughly is around about 50–60%. In the UK, in a secondary school, it's not unusual for it to be 85% contact time. And in a primary school, 100%. Now, if that's the case, where on earth do you get the time to do your CPD? But actually interesting what some people do.
You know, I think that's the issue with all of us, you know, all teachers here, that's what they always complain, that because we have so much of, time constraints in terms of managing our curriculum and doing all the other work, when do we get time for CPD, you know? So that is a huge question that will remain and that persists.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what you can build it in. I mean, for example, in the middle school here, when we were on campus, time was put aside by the headmistress to have a period during the week, or 2 periods during the week, where the teachers would have a commonly shared session, which would, you know, be a focus on whatever the school development plan was, or whatever the plan for that term was. And that worked really well. Learning communities within school, creating your learning communities, that can be within subjects, it can be within house teams, it can be all sorts of different communities that sometimes you can have triads of people where they work together on a school, action. So they do action research. Action research is a superb way of learning. You know, and if 3 of you are involved in that, and then you feed back to the wider community of the school, that helps as well.
You know, I think action research, I'm sorry I'm interrupting you here, but I would like to make this point here that action research, definitely, as you said, very, very important. However, in Pakistan, somehow, you know, we don't have this practice of teachers being teachers as researchers, you know. Although it is such an important part of being a teacher, is a classroom-based action research. And, you know, in our department, we are really trying to push for that. And we are really trying to push for action research and making teachers realize that they can construct their own knowledge sitting in the classroom. And you know how empowering it is for them. And it is a part of professional development, it's part of their learning and continuously learning with kids and, you know, what they can take back to the classroom. So I think it's very, very important that you talked about this.
No, absolutely. And you know, with the learning communities, it's something which people can shift those learning communities. They don't have to be part of the same one year after year. Beginner teachers. Now, I know it's different here. I've just talked about teacher training in the UK. We do not have a formal system here, although some of the bigger groups do. I know that. So, for example, I know from the City School that they have a program, a well-developed program over the year. I'm not trying to steal Afzal's thunder here, but it's how do you do that in a way that it's benefiting the teachers? Because again, beginner teachers, I mean, I had a teacher today who, yes, has got some experience, but he hasn't gone through formal teacher training, and he will be going into a classroom. So how do I know that he's going to be able to do what he can do? Well, we'll maintain that the best training is actually being in the classroom. But we do need to have developed programs in all of our schools, which are to do with, looking at portfolios, putting things together, doing research, bringing that back and so on, and understanding the policies, how you develop it. And so I could carry on. But it is crucial to have a beginner teacher program in any school. And finally, experts. You sort of introduced us as experts earlier. I'm not sure if I am. I'm a practitioner who does my job. I don't call it a job. It's always been a vocation, but I do what I do. Whether that makes me an expert, I don't know. But there are people who come into schools as consultants who can be helpful, but choose them carefully. There's a lot of people out there, and I say this very clearly to schools, particularly in Karachi. There are people out there who will say they are experts. You need to check who they are, what their CV is, and so on. Because the right people will make a huge difference, but the wrong people can do a lot of damage. So there we go. Just a quick summary. I will stop sharing now. Okay, I think I'm back.
Yes. Okay, Simon, so while you were talking, I was thinking of my whole professional development course that I'm teaching, and I think you summarized it so well. I mean, in your presentation, you talked about how leaders, so correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to, bring everything in what you said, and according to my understanding, is that, it is very important for leaders to strategically plan in the beginning.
Yes.
So that is the most important thing. And I think when we fail to do that as a leader, strategic planning and making sure that CPD is a part of that planning. And whether we create learning communities, or we whether call them learning circles, or we have one day allotted for CPD within the week, every week. So, I do know schools here that have a professional development, ongoing professional development every week. So once a week is allotted for professional development of teachers. The kids are sent home early because the parents also know that this is time for professional development of teachers, So I think that's a great model that one can follow, And while you are inducting teachers, you can tell them beforehand that this is something that you will be required to do as part of your job here, right? So planning is extremely important, as you rightly put it. And I was still wondering, data. Well, I do know that data is something that we probably, are scared to touch. So there's a lot of data, but nobody goes through that data. And I think your point was that, and that's why it was great, that it's probably, if I'm not wrong, it's probably that we don't pick out a lot from our data, because I think it's very time consuming. And, let's say, as you said, experts, we call experts, and then we give them random topics. But if we gather the information from our data, it is, it acts as a diagnostic tool for us as well. And it helps us better plan for, our own teachers, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Great. So everybody who's listening, so please plan, evaluate your data, look at what your teachers are asking for, and then make time for professional development. It is not going to be done, after a year. It shouldn't be done after a year or after 6 months. It should be a continuous process. Like Simon said, you have to plan for it and you have to keep at it continuously. So amazing. Thank you so much, Simon. Mohammed Afzal, I am going to now ask you something. So can you please tell us, Mohammed Afzal, that what are the national expectations in terms of key characteristics and practices of effective teachers?
Well, I think the biggest expectation is to teach well, right? And when we talk about improving learning outcomes, we always talk about improving teaching practices. So both things, they go hand in hand. Now that stage is perfectly set, and Simon has introduced many different themes, and we are at a stage where we can actually now look into those specific areas where professional development is really, really important. And those specific themes, which are also named as performance standards, and how those performance standards are categorized and useful for teachers to improve learning. Before I move to that, I would like to share one quotation from 𝗘𝗵𝗵𝗡, who used to say, "We all should undergo professional development, which is continuous, not because we do not know something, but because there is always a chance and there is always an opportunity to bring improvement." So when you talk about bringing improvement, you need to be pretty clear about your objectives, about your targets, and what are the areas where you want to bring improvement in your teaching practices in particular. So to illustrate you that, I can share with you what our national standards are. Now, one of the biggest advantage of having this diverse community in this webinar is we are going to get a hands-on sort of things to different models. And fortunately, I'm presenting what teachers' competencies or professional standards are actually driven in Pakistan. And it may surprise many of my colleagues who are watching this webinar, that these competencies and these performance standards were introduced way back in 2009. And though I was also part of teachers education program, and I just came to know about these professional standards a couple of years ago. I mean, this is the irony that being part of the teaching profession, being part of the teachers training program even, we're not very much aware of all of these resources, which may help us in streamlining, in balancing our professional development programs and activities. And as Mr. Simon says, some of the professional development activities, they are face-to-face, they are trainings, they are lecture-based, and most of them are hands-on. Most of them, they are part of your routine practice. Now, how can you divide all of these? How can you bring everything into a design framework? There is a structure of these competencies which are given already by different organizations, and particularly if you talk about Pakistani perspective. So my teachers, my school leaders who are part of this webinar, I invite them to search on internet and look for national performance standards for teachers. Those are downloadable and available. And this is just a snapshot of those standards. When you download this document, you will be able to get a complete description of these performance standards. For each performance standards, you're going to get the details around it. But what is really important in all of this, why I'm showing you these performance standards? Because your professional development will become high impact professional development if you look at these performance standards, because these are evidence-based performance standards. These are driven by the research that having these 10 competencies in teacher will always lead towards effective and improvement in teaching and ultimately improvement in student outcomes. And whenever you look at these competencies, you always ask yourself these three things, like what do my teachers know already? Say, for example, you pick one performance standard and it is about assessment, standard 5. You want to offer a professional development experience that may be a face-to-face situation or a teacher-led or a collaborative one. You ask yourself three questions. What do my teachers know already about assessment? What is their belief? What is their attitude? What is their own consent about different sorts of assessment in the classroom? And number 3, what teachers can do and what they should be able to do after going through this particular professional development experience. When your professional development design is conformed with these standards, only then you can evaluate the impact of your training programs. And then you also have your own models from where you can see the effectiveness, the impact of these programs. And one of those model I would like to suggest here is given by Thomas Guskey. And if you look at that model, it gives you 4 different stages of impact evaluation right from the start of the training program, and then what was the learning which was developed by the training, and then what permanent change in behavior and practice is seen, and what is the impact of that change in terms of student development and student learning outcomes. So these 4 ideas will always help you to categorize and to make a decision whether your professional development initiatives are in right direction. Are you on right track? Once you have your standards in place and you know what your teachers know already, what they should be able to do, what sort of behaviors you want to develop, then you develop a strategy to evaluate the outcome, and you start looking at the performance of those professional development initiatives. So I think this really helps a lot. So knowing professional standards does not only give you an idea of what are the expectations from the teacher, but also help you in driving the strategy for professional development in your own school and evaluating the impact of those professional development. I hope.
Right. Afzal, I'm glad that you shared the 10 professional standards for teachers. So these are for people who just tuned in. Again, I will reiterate that these are the 10 professional standards. If you are a teacher, you should be able to have knowledge about all these areas. So it is not true that only subject matter knowledge is important, as it is saying that this is the first standard when you want to become a good teacher and an effective teacher. You have to have information about human development and growth. So if you're learning and teaching about young children, you should be able to have some information about child development. You need to know about planning. You need to know about assessment. You need to know how to design an effective and conducive learning environment. उसके बाद आप देख रहे हैं that there are 4 or 5 more standards जिसके अंदर collaboration and partnerships with families and your own continuous professional development and teaching of English as a second and a foreign language is also a part of our professional standards. So these are comprehensively, and Afzal has explained them really well. और इसके अंदर Afzal, as you rightly said, कि ये document जो है वो सिर्फ ये नहीं है. It is like a huge document. और अगर आप इसको डाउनलोड करेंगे, ये एक बहुत जबरदस्त डॉक्यूमेंट है जिसके अंदर आपको हर एक कॉम्पिटेंसी के अंदर, फॉर इंस्टेंस स्टैंडर्ड नंबर 1 is subject matter knowledge. We will tell you within that. So the document tells you about what are the points within subject matter knowledge that you need to make sure that you understand. इसके अंदर dispositions अलग explain की गई हैं, teacher की क्या होनी चाहिए, उसकी knowledge level अलग दिया गया है. So it's a really beautifully designed document that all of you, all your teachers, इस webinar के बाद आपने जाके ये download करना है, and you should make sure that you go through all these standards. So now that we have talked about national standards, so these were our Pakistan ke national standards, we are going to be moving to international standards, and Sarah, I'm going to be talking to you about it. So what are the global expectations and best practices in terms of key characteristics and practices of effective teachers?
Thank you so much. It's always at this point in a webinar when you think it's kind of with abject relief that you realise everything that you're about to say in your presentation resonates with everything that's gone before. It's almost like, you know, almost like we designed it. It's fantastic. So thank you so much for the opportunity now to talk to you then about Cambridge International's standards. We've got standards for teachers and school leaders. I'm going to focus mainly on the teachers' standards today because I think that they will be of most interest to you. And I apologise firstly for after seeing Simon's beautiful, very clear slides, you've now got some very tiny writing to deal with here, so I apologise, but I'm really happy to share all the links for this afterwards if you'd like to explore this in more detail. Everything that I talk about is freely available on the Cambridge website. So just a tiny bit of background. The Cambridge standards came into being in 2018, and that's not to say that prior to that Cambridge didn't have standards. They very much did, but they were kind of implicit rather than explicit and very much woven through everything that we do. So our professional development qualifications that we've touched on is very much woven through all of that. We ended up with 8 statements rather than 10. It was kind of rather disconcerting to see all the thumbs up for 10 standards in the chat bar, knowing that I had only 8 to show you now. But I think hopefully you'll see that we've been able to group some of ours together so that they sort of cover the areas that perhaps were a little more extrapolated in the national version. And the way that we drew these standards together was from a variety of desk-based research, but then also kind of engaging with other national and global sets of standards around the world so that we could pull together something that meant something across a global community. So recognising that, of course, there are national standards as well. Some schools even have their own standards, so they kind of need to speak across quite a broad area and to quite a different set of contexts globally. Ours are designed so that standards 1 to 4 are pretty much about what you need to know to be an effective classroom practitioner, whereas standards 5 to 8 are about what you do. So they're kind of split very much into knowledge and into practice. And I think probably the one that sort of sums up most, I will just skip forward there. The one that I'm pulling out there is about implementing effective planning, teaching, learning and assessment practice. And I think that's the one actually that was quite extrapolated in the local standards. We've put that all together under one standard. So just to skip back briefly, the whole reason for wanting to make these then very explicit for people is that we knew that there was value in having an idea of what Cambridge said would look like. What does effective classroom practice look like according to Cambridge? And so that's of some value. As I say, it needs to be read alongside any sort of national standards or very local standards, but having that laid out is a useful thing to have. We also, being a large organisation, we have other standards as well, some of which are our attributes that you might be familiar with if you teach in Cambridge schools. And of course, it needed to be aligned so that we could almost show what those look like in practice, those different attributes. And we were very kind of mindful of the fact that having standards provided a shared framework of conversation and language that people could have when they talked about what it meant to be an effective classroom practitioner. Well, what does that look like? How do we kind of pull that all together in a descriptive statement? And so the standards offer us that sort of opportunity. The teacher standards and the school leader standards work together. They are complementary of one another. So you can see that mapping through from the school leader standards and into the teacher standards.
Which is so important.
Absolutely. And you need to know, don't you, that you're making decisions at one level that are having an impact at another. So
absolutely. Yeah.
Where we've kind of taken these further then is firstly in what we call our standard statements. So every single one of those top 8 standards comes with a breakdown into these standard statements. And you can't read this detail here, but this takes you down into the level of, planning for progression, setting challenging goals, coming up with appropriate teaching strategies, and so on. You know, it breaks it down into that level of granularity. But of course, then we realised that what was important was how our schools were using them and how they became used in practice. And you can imagine kind of 8 top-level standards, and you saw how many standard statements were below standard 5. There are about 41 items altogether. So that's quite a lot of things to be applying across your practice. And so I was very keen to say to them, well, how are you doing that then? In reality, how does that work for you? And I've just got a couple of examples. So this is my sort of slightly unartistic way of demonstrating to you one school who said what they like to do each term is they take a piece of flip chart paper and they write one of the standards across it and they stick it up in the staff room. And people from all across the school, and we've talked about learning communities earlier on, from the learning community and everyone within that learning community were encouraged to place post-its on that standard and say, well, this is how I'm doing that. You know, from everyone in the school office through to, you know, people actually teaching in classrooms or the principal, everybody sort of contributed to that. And this was really a starting point for them. They were able to think about how the standards were having value to them and how they were able to kind of embody those. So that's one example.
That's a great idea. I think it is a fantastic idea. I think a lot of people who would be listening and school leaders should be implementing that within their schools as well. So having one standard up in the staff room and people pitching in and, you know, saying what we have been doing for one whole month. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, thank you. And as I say, it's a way to start, isn't it? Sometimes this is daunting. You look at these standards, you think, well, where on earth do I start with that? Well, that's, you know, that's just one way. I loved Simon's grey data slide. And I kind of, as he was talking, I was thinking about my own experience of that as a teacher, as an English teacher, I have to say, when someone would put the data in my pigeonhole and I would think, oh my goodness, okay, where do I go with this now? And so I I also started to talk to schools about the standards as a tool for interrogation, and thinking about how each of those standard statements could then be used as a way to question data. So how do I plan for the progression of my students based on the data that I have in front of me? And it was a way of then starting to think about, yes, okay, standards are necessary, of course they are, but equally as tools for helping us understand our practice better, they offer us other things. So as I say, this is just an example of one way that you might do that, but it might be that you apply those questions to all areas of your practice. And then finally, I just wanted to share with you, and again, this kind of goes back to where Simon started, which is about, where do you start with understanding what improvements you want to make, what pathways you want for your students, for your teachers and for your school leaders, and how do you measure the success of that in a kind of continuing and ongoing way? And so we developed what we're calling the RAG tools, and this is a tool based on a very sort of simple traffic light system, red, amber and green. And the idea is that each of those standard statements shared with you before is then broken down further into very specific questions that underpin that piece of practice. And the idea is then you rate yourself against it. Now, there are many questions here that we probably haven't got time to address, and the main one for me is around culture, and around in order to go down this route, the culture of being vulnerable, I guess, about your practice has got to be something that's evidenced, because what we're advocating here is that teachers and school leaders would potentially say, I'm not very good at some of these things. Some of these things I am very good at, but there are some of these things that I'm not very good at. And if I show you the next slide, it may well be that when you're thinking about setting goals for your students, that there are some areas that you're very happy to say you're green on, that you're very confident with, other areas potentially not so much. But what you can build up from this, of course, is a real picture, either at an individual level, or I started thinking the other day about, I used to be a department head, and this would have been a really great thing to do with my department, because collectively, where are our strengths and where are our challenges, and how then can we use either professional development or less formal things like mentoring and coaching? How can we use those things in order to develop people that work with us, and to use that information valuably? And of course, kind of back to Simon's point about the evaluation of that, this then is something that you can do. You do it to begin with to work out where you might want to, and I think you were talking about a diagnostics idea earlier on. This might be a diagnostic for professional development, but it might also be an evaluation tool later on to see how successful some of those decisions have been. And I just wanted to leave you with... I never leave anything without talking about the PDQs if I can. But I was mindful of a conversation that I'd had with a principal in China not so long ago, and he was telling me about how he used the standards. And he has this process that he calls find the gaps, fill the gaps. And he uses the standards as a way of finding where the gaps are in professional development, or even just confidence, even if we come down to just a confidence level. He finds out where those gaps are using the standards, and then he decides how to fill them. And one of the ways in which he fills them is with a professional development program. And so this is that sustained and embedded approach that we talked about right at the start of this webinar, with any one of the 4 syllabuses that Cambridge offer, and this really intense but worthwhile program of 150 hours of learning across a 4-month period, based on guided learning, work-based learning, and then individual and collaborative learning with a mentor, putting together a portfolio of evidence. So, as I say, just a very quick sort of mention for the PDQs there as something that is really good value professional development in order to help teachers progress and school leaders. So, as I say, that's sharing my screen. Is it helpful if I share those links in the chat?
Yes. You want to share them in chat?
Sure, we'll do.
Yeah, because some people, now that I'm reading the comments, I wasn't I was focusing so much on your discussion that there's so many comments that I was just reading, and a lot of people have sent in messages and asked a few
Sadiya,
questions.
may I just read few ones, because I am on the console, and I can see
Yes,
certain
please.
questions and comments coming from the audience.
Absolutely.
There's one
Ji.
question I think which Sarah was mentioning to that point as well. The question is very much pertinent, and it says like, how can we encourage self-directed professional development among teachers? So I think if you could relate it with the RAG tool for self-evaluation, and then for the more sustainable one, like how would you describe this one to answer this question?
By self-directed, do we mean self-evaluative? Is that what we mean there?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and do you know what? This comes back to the point that I was making earlier about culture, and I think it's really, really important that this is driven by senior leadership saying, actually, this is a culture within which we are happy for people to tell us where they might need more support, or indeed where they feel really confident and feel that they can support others. And I think you're right, Afzal, that RAG tool, again, I should give you all of the links in the chat, is a really good place to start, because it allows you privately at first, if you wish, to think about your own practice and where your own strengths and challenges might be, but then to share that more broadly with teams or even just a mentor, but to give you that opportunity to really think about you and your practice and where your areas of strength and challenge might be. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, Ms. Sadiya, over to you if you have any comments there and questions.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, for my audience's clarity, I wanted to reiterate with you, Sarah, of what the tool that you just talked about, and you showed us how that could be filled. So the RAG tool, which is red, amber, and green, right? So are we giving the information out to our audience, and we are telling them that this is a tool that they can use for self-evaluation, and it is based on the 8 standards that you have in UK, and the one that we have here should be on the 10 standards that we have here in Pakistan, right? And then for us to evaluate ourselves where we are at this point.
Yeah.
Is that how it works?
Yeah, I think so. And I think what you would find is once you hold the Cambridge standards and the local standards side by side, I think you'll see that they really speak to one another. So it would be a case of finding out, because I think probably the key thing to begin with is that you can either approach this as an individual teacher, or as a school leader, you might like to look at this more holistically and start sort of positioning it.
Right. So the links that you have provided now, Sarah, will we be able to access these tools from there?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm just having trouble working out how to put things in that, but I will share them.
Thank you so much for that.
Sarah,
I'm sure that will be very, very valuable for
I'm sharing the link to download teachers and school leader standards in the chat box.
Perfect. Thank you.
That will be fantastic. So Afzal, can you display a few of the comments here so we can also have them live? So there, Dr. Najma Nisa, who is the head of the Department of Education, is on board with us. She has been sending some messages as well. And one of them says that introducing professional learning communities at school is the need of the time. Yes, of course. And that's what we have been talking about. Saima Iram, this is a matter of teacher are born or made. Teachers' quality can be improved. Yes, so a huge, debate and 2 schools of thoughts. Leaders are born or made. Teachers are born or made. I mean, professional development tells us that, yes, teachers are made. You may have a few qualities that and dispositions that will help you become a better teacher than the other. But definitely professional development plays a huge role in this.
And there is another question, and I'm going to, I would request from both esteemed speakers to tell us about these ideas. The question is it really important to go for sort of training sessions which are in lecture-based style, or there are other forms which are more important and more effective as well? Would you like to say a few things about it? So,
who's going to go first?
Yes, Simon.
I suspect we're going to say the same thing, Simon.
We're very, very polite, very English. I was going to say that, I mean, there's a few comments I've read. I mean, someone talked about CPD in the context of Pakistan, which is a very good point, because I did bring a lot of examples from the UK, but I've also brought examples from my local experience, which is important. And someone said, here there's only talk about formal education. Good point. I mean, in a way, we need to be thinking more about how. You see, the lecture thing is great for some things, but practice is much better. It's what I said at the beginning from my Durham University experience, where I learned a lot more being in a classroom with someone who tried to burn down a tyre service at the weekend than I did, being sat in with another postgrad person next to me. And it, in a way, the practice of going out, even team building, where people go in teams and they are going away for weekends and learning about themselves. Someone touched on earlier about people. We talked a lot about knowing things, but, interaction, engagement is what we're about, is what we do, and I think, therefore, just being sat in a lecture theatre isn't the best way. Even now, this is interesting. This is a substitute, really, for a lecture theatre. We're just doing it in our little boxes, and with our death by PowerPoints, etc. We've been doing that for years, but there are different ways. Quite literally, thinking outside the box, and I think that we need to think of practical ways of doing things, which are a lot more. Research was mentioned. You see, that's another way. That's not sat in a classroom. Doing things which are with students, which have a sort of a long project, which again has an outcome. There's a myriad of ways in which we can do things which are not tied to sitting on a seat listening to somebody in front of a whiteboard.
Yeah, and Sarah, from you, there's another question. Since I am reading this chat, so it's coming to me. And I'm sorry, Sadiya, I'm taking your seat and
not at all. Because,
so
I can't see all the comments, so I'm glad that you're taking this forward.
So there is another question which says, like, what is the reason that after going through a wonderful training experience or a professional development workshop, when we come back, we are unable to implement that in our practice, and it doesn't go with us for a very long period of time? Are there any ways so that we can sustain with this kind of situation? So the question is, like, if you come across a good training experience, but when you go back, you're unable to make a change in your practice. So what are the ways that we can bring improvement?
And that's always the difficulty, isn't it? I've been to some really brilliant training sessions as an individual teacher that I felt in that moment probably have changed the way that I might do something in my classroom. It's the ability then to be able to disseminate that well, that is the kind of stopping point, I think, always, which speaks to that sustained and embedded model that we were talking about earlier. If as a cohort of teachers you are travelling a journey together, your practice is changing together, that's far more likely to stick and far more likely to become something that's, very habitual for you. And of course, then you build in that reflective element. And I think, I kind of go back to that, the benefit of being a reflective practitioner, whereby you're trying something, you're reflecting on it, you're improving it. And I think that's the way really to be able to make things stick. And I think all of your comments that you've made so far today and the things that are coming in the chat about being a professional learning community, if nothing else, if we take nothing else away from today, it would be so wonderful if that element of it we're able to continue through, to support one another and to be able to share that learning amongst yourselves based on research, but equally, as Simon has just said, based on practice too.
Yeah. Right. So being reflective practitioner is really an important area. And I think for a professional development experience to sustain, a teacher or a leader should focus on being reflective in the practice. So Ms. Adi, is there any other comment from your side or any question?
Well, I'm trying to read through the questions. There are a few, I think you did just talk about its application. So Nida Ehtisham has asked or has sent in a comment. It is important, but I think its application is equally important. And to have liberty and freedom to implement our learning in the classroom is very crucial. Because teachers have to stick to a fixed curriculum and teaching practice, teachers become demotivated to invest in training and new learning. And, as we talked about this earlier as well, that, this is what happens. You go to a training, you attend it, but then once you come back, there's so much pressure of other work that, you just it just fizzles out and it just somewhere over there. So Simon, would you like to give teachers a tip on how to, when once they've learned something from a session, how to actually not forget it and try and implement it and make it a practice?
It's called takeaways. I mean, you've got to focus really on a few things. You can't focus on all of it. So you think of maybe 2 to 3 points. I often ask people, what were the top 3 things you learned from that session?
Yeah.
And you just jot that down, and rather than try and remember everything. And then maybe focus on putting one of those things into practice. I think that's always good as well. Give yourself a challenge for the week ahead.
Yeah. So not focusing on everything, but then making a personalized plan for yourself. This is what I need. This is what I will do. And then make sure that you go back and you do it.
Yeah, great. Absolutely. The great thing is everyone here will take away something different. And that's
absolutely.
Because, again, we're all different, we're all individual, and it's all about personalized learning.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think with that, we will summarize and we will end our webinar for today, because it's been more than an hour. We just didn't seem so, with all the conversation going on and such productive discussions happening. So I think takeaway, as you said, is very, very important, and a summary of today's webinar. For a lot of people, which I can see in the chat, are the professional standards and how we have, shown both the professional standards nationally and internationally as well. I think that is one takeaway that most of, our audience are taking away from here. And I'm sure that they will make an effort to now download the professional standards as suggested by Afzal here. And we can also benefit from Sarah's tools and the links that she has shared with us. So thank you so much for that. And planning, as we all talked about, is very, very crucial. Strategic planning is important. Going back to your data is extremely crucial. And then developing a plan, which is a continuous professional development plan rather than just giving one-off trainings, is a much better plan. So thank you, everyone, for being here and for all your comments. Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you so much, Sarah. I know you are on UK time and you've given us your lunch break. So really grateful for that. Afzal, thank you so much for helping me and helping the department organize this. And last but not the least, Dr. 𝗪𝗓𝗔𝗧𝗧, who is always very, very active in, arranging these webinars and getting such good audience as well as amazing speakers for us. So thank you everyone for logging in today. I hope you have a great evening. Allah Hafiz.
Bye-bye.
Allah Hafiz.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so
you.
much.